You are listening to the Palestine in America podcast. On today's episode, Palestinian director Farah Nabulsi is joined by our contributor Lema Ubaid. They discuss Nabulsi's feature film The Teacher, filming in Palestine, and so much more.
We're glad to have Farah today, Farah Nabulsi. And she's going to be telling us about her movie, The Teacher, and its screenings in the US. So Farah, can you begin by telling our listeners on the Palestine in America podcast, who is Farah Nabulsi and how your career in filmmaking began?
Sure. Okay. Who is Farah Nabulsi? I'm still figuring that out, to be honest, but I'm somebody who was born and raised and educated in the UK in London. And but I'm British in that sense, but I am Palestinian, 100% Arab on both my parents' side. And I grew up in the UK thinking I understood the lived Palestinian experience, or at least the history, the injustice, and that we were, a people who had been severely oppressed, and our land had been taken, and so forth. And I went to Palestine a number of times as a child, and then around the first Intifada, nothing. So for around 25 years, my parents didn't take me back. And as an adult, around 10 years ago, I decided to travel to Palestine for the first time. And at the time, I was running a for-profit business. I have a banking sort of finance background. I was an investment banker. I had never studied film or cinema or anything. Always loved cinema and theater and drama. But I went to Palestine and saw with my own eyes the reality on the ground. I spent a lot of time with Palestinians, and to be honest, it hit me like a ton of bricks, the reality there. So Farah, who at this point is a mother, a wife, a business owner, literally changed the trajectory of my life in the most cheesy of ways. I can say to you that that initial trip to Palestine, to militarily occupied and colonized Palestine and a place of apartheid, changed me. And it changed me so in the sense of I went home, and I just couldn't look away. And I mean, I don't know if I'm kind of going off track or into a next question perhaps, but I had started to write therapeutically for personal reasons, to sort of deal with and cope with what I had come to realize and witnessed and so forth. But then for the next 2 years after these trips, so there was the initial trip and then I was going back and forth for a couple of years. I finally concluded that I, as Farah, wanted to express myself creatively. I wanted to tell these human stories that I'd come across, of people who clearly had been marginalized, had been misrepresented, had been silenced. And I felt like I had something to say, as it were, and to sort of lend some kind of artistic expression to, if you like. And on the other hand, I was getting to know myself also, just my identity. Who is Farah? And not just, in this idea of becoming a filmmaker potentially, but as a human being, like what do I stand for, and where can I find meaning in my existence, in my life? And this really felt like a calling for me. So I decided to adapt my first few writings into short films. I don't know, I've gone, haven't told you too much about who Farah was as a child, but there we go.
Thank you. No, it's fine. So I also wanted to ask you because on your website I saw that like you're very into comedy and you said like if you weren't like writing films about Palestine, that you hope to like one day also do like comedic films. So I want to ask you like as Palestinian artists in general and Palestinian creatives, do you think it's important always to have, you know, Palestine in the art and creative expression? Or do you think as an artist you can also go not away from Palestine or shy away from it, but also to, you know, have a variety of things in your work? Or do you think as long as like Palestine is under occupation, all you want to focus now is on the Palestinian narrative?
No, I mean, I for sure, as a filmmaker, I'm ready already to do work that's not just Palestine focused. But yeah, I think until Palestine is liberated, I will always be interested and want to make films related to Palestine. So I'll give you an example. At the moment, I've co-written a screenplay with a talented Lebanese American writer, with a view that I would direct it. That's got nothing to do with Palestine, and it is something that matters to me, and it's loosely based on experience I had as an investment banker in the late 1990s. Greed is bad, that's that. But then on the other hand, I'm just finishing up writing, my next sort of Palestine-related screenplay that is a drama, but is also I call it a drama comedy as well. So I'm already kind of doing and writing what I want to be doing and writing, whether it's Palestine related or not. For me, the most important thing is I want to make films that have a depth and a meaning for me, not just as a filmmaker, but as a human being, that matter to me personally. And I just think the best films that are made are where the filmmaker has really connected with the material or the source material. In this case, I'm writing the source material, as it were. So I've got lots of sort of Palestine related ideas and concepts and things I'm working on, but then there's also non-Palestine. And I'm not quite sure where you read or what you'd read, but for me, it was just a matter of, I realized that my first films are full on drama, and they are quite dark and heavy. And I'd love for Palestinian creatives, for us all to be able to really make art films about anything we want under the sun, whether related to Palestine, our culture, our history, the beautiful and the ugly, whatever we want. Unfortunately, at the moment, we're in a place where all of our work, no matter what it is, really by default is sort of political or politicized. And of course, it's because it matters to so many of us because we are Palestinians, and so I think it's a mix. But I'd love for us all to have the flexibility and the ability and no need for expectations, if you get my meaning.
And I want to ask you about your new or your film that's now going to be screening in the US, The Teacher. The film itself was shot in the West Bank. Um, what challenges did you face while shooting this film?
Yeah, I mean, it's, the challenges I faced for this film are, in many ways similar to the challenge I faced in shooting my last film, The Present, which I shot in the Bethlehem area. And this film I shot in the Nablus area. At the end of the day, we're shooting films in militarily occupied, colonized territory, right? So that's unfolding around you in real time. And it's a bit warped because really what you're trying to do is do justice to the injustice that is unfolding around you in real time. And so, it's not the path of least resistance to shoot on the ground in Palestine. And when you're making independent cinema, you've already got it's already a difficult job, regardless of where you are in the world. And then you go to the West Bank of Palestine, and you've just, doubled, tripled your problems in many ways of what could go wrong. Now, I feel really grateful though in the sense that we managed to get to the finish line just before things really started to I don't want to use the expression blow up, but yeah, get pretty hectic as this sort of extreme right-wing government came into power inside 48 in Israel. Anyway, so on the ground, we expect like checkpoints and roadblocks. And of course, these things are there and they affect production and they're frustrating, but expected, and you get through them. What wasn't expected, I guess I should have expected, and I'm aware of it all because it's all in the film itself,
Mhm.
but reality really does bite, was I guess not expected, more like handling the challenge of, um, you know, uh, things happening that are very, very close to you as you're trying to finish this film, as you're trying to stay positive, get to the finish line, keep everyone safe. So, for example, at one point towards the end of the shoot, the Israeli military started to drop bombs on Gaza. This was, towards the end of the summer of 2022.
Mhm.
And of course, that's not in the West Bank, but you can imagine the heightened nervousness and everyone's on edge in the West Bank. And then, at one point we finished shooting a scene at 2 in the morning in the heart of Nablus. And then about 6 in the morning, I get a message on my phone when I wake up. And, the Israeli military had entered Nablus, the main city, and blown up a home. And it was about 2 kilometers from where we had been shooting a few hours earlier. At one point, we got word that in the village of Berin, illegal Israeli settlers had descended yet again and started torching olive groves there. Now, the teacher in the film is from the village of Berin. We were not shooting in the village of Berin. We were shooting in a village nearby. Because I'm actually aware how violent and vicious these settlers can be in the village of Berin. But they're saying, "Oh, look, we could see the smoke in the distance." It's and yet we have a scene similar to that in the film itself. So it was more the emotional mental toll for me. Those were the main challenges. Everything else is logistical, practical, physical problems that you figure out. For those who don't know, the Israeli military, they divide the West Bank into areas A, B, and C. And areas A are the sort of city centers, which the military can enter anytime they like, as described when they entered Nablus that night. But there are less military presence there. There's it's areas B and C where there's more checkpoints, more of the illegal settlers, more military presence. We tried, of course, when we could, to shoot things in areas A where we would take, permits from the Palestinian ministries and things. And they're very forthcoming and fine with that. Once you go into areas B and C, it gets a bit more complicated. And we did have to shoot in areas B and even C at one point. And, that's when you're a bit more nervous and things could go wrong and questions do start getting asked. And we had to engage villagers, we had to engage the villagers who were in those areas, the Palestinian villagers, to kind of coordinate with us, even if we needed to stop traffic or things like that, so that, they would understand what we were doing, and also people not to be suspicious of our intentions and who we were. But we're not really taking permission from anyone when we're shooting in areas B and C, where so you're always on edge, wondering what's going to happen. There's watchtowers. Literally, there was a watchtower very close to where we were shooting, and we would just make it a point to try and shoot behind a bit of a hill. So we were blocked, like a bit of a block from the watchtower. You're taking precautions. We're not a documentary. The film is not a documentary, so we're not looking for that reality and searching it out and seeking it out and kind of arriving and then would be noticed. We're trying to incubate in a bit of a cocoon, artistically to create and to finish the film as much as possible, of course.
And I want to ask you, like, through the characters, like in The Teacher, when you're writing, How do you see things like from a different points of view of the characters? As you create your characters, do you talk to people like on the ground? Is it like from previous stories that you heard from people or from your family?
Yeah, it's a mix. It's everything. It's everything. It could be from something I'd read. It could be from Palestinians I've met with over the years, conversations. It could be from the news. It could be from, yes, family members. It's a mix. But I mean, really, the teacher itself is a film that, I mean, you know, which encompasses so many true stories, as it were, and lived experiences, whether it be Palestinian children being processed through Israeli military detention, whether it's home demolitions, uh, settler violence, vandalism. And so I do try to carry out sort of an empathetic process, like it's like uh, a process of really trying to put myself in the shoes of, that mother whose son has been taken away in the middle of the night, or, that family whose home has been demolished, or, it's the practice of empathy. That's how I do it. The story is also inspired by the real life story of an Israeli occupation soldier who was captured in 2006 and was released in 2011 for over 1,000 Palestinian political prisoners. And I remember that story being in the British media at the time, and this is before I became a filmmaker. But then I revisited that story on one of my trips, speaking with someone. And, I remember that story really kind of blowing my mind in the sense of this imbalance in value for human life. One soldier for 1,000 Palestinians, hundreds of whom were women and children, hundreds of whom were being held in administrative detention, which means without trial or charge. And I kind of contemplated this idea that that's probably really, really one of the main roots, or at the root of the problem, where Palestinian lives are just not valued the way a Jewish Israeli life is, whether by the international community or by Israelis themselves, which really, I mean, if you look at Gaza now, it's culminated for this scale of violence to be conducted, this psychotic violence in Gaza, as this genocide rages on, the level of dehumanization that has taken place over the decades is beyond comprehension. And so at the time, for me, that 1 to 1,000 was, clear of the level of dehumanization and understanding that Palestinians have, that their oppressor values them, one of them for 1,000 of hours, as it were. So that inspired this story in that sense, very much so as well. So yeah, it just comes from all these different directions, and then really the process of just trying to be empathetic. And it's an exercise. It's like a muscle in some ways. And I think it comes naturally to me, because that's something I tend to do, even if I'm speaking with a friend who's telling me they're having a bad day or something's happening. I tend to kind of put myself in their shoes just naturally. And that's how I can, feel with them, so that's the process.
Yeah. Yeah. And the reason like I asked you that is because like while watching the movie, as you said, like it's not a documentary, but these are stories that like we actually see like happen on a day-to-day basis. So it could actually be, somebody's story that um like who had lived through that. Um
Yeah, the difference is though what's so beautiful about cinema and film, and this is, I hadn't mentioned it earlier, but one of the main reasons why I went into cinema as my expression of my creativity, as it were, is cinema has this incredible ability, of course you're taking the visual with all this emotional resonance, but you're bringing what otherwise, whether in the news is sort of numbers or maps or figures or law or faceless, victims, as it were, and you're just bringing, so what in some ways is almost abstract, especially as an example with something like Gaza, where how do you even process, you know, tens upon tens upon tens of thousands of people killed or maimed, hundreds of thousands maimed, injured, displaced. So you're bringing that and the abstract and the distant much closer. And that's with that focus on the human, on the personal stories, on the human dynamics, getting specific, and that's the beauty of storytelling through cinema, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I also wanted to ask you, like, as you said that, the story of the soldier, it was like really big in British media. And
Mm.
the same thing, like we saw on October 7th, the stories of the Israelis, it was really big. And the reason probably that everybody heard of, what's going on now was because like there was such like a focus in the media on these Israeli lives or these Israeli people or soldiers. Um, so I
Yeah,
wanted,
no, sorry, I was going to interrupt you, but
go ahead.
just think about it. Every scenario where the most horrific things have been happening to Palestinians by Israel, um, that had you just reverse it, just change the words to say, okay, instead of a Palestinian, it was an Israeli killed, or if Hind Rajab had been an Israeli 6-year-old, 8-year-old in a car, if and pummeled with bullets. If 15 Israeli paramedics had been executed and buried with their ambulance, also buried. If you think about all those human rights workers, the aid workers, the journalists, just flip it, and they're not Palestinian anymore. They're Israeli. They're Israeli Jewish, or they're American, or they're British. And just, that's an exercise I think everyone needs to conduct around the world to say, right, if I just flip these headlines, and use the language that would have been applied, had they been Israeli or Western, victims, then how would that have resonated, and how, you know what I mean? And it's a crazy exercise, because it really reveals so much about the biases and the racism. And I've had a few people actually reach out to me after certain interviews and having watched my film, confessing to me. And it's really powerful to receive those kind of messages from people, strangers, who say, do you know, your film or your interview made me realize actually something I didn't realize, it brought to their consciences, how biased they actually were, or yes, why is it I kind of put out a Ukrainian flag, or I, gave a shit about, sorry, am I allowed to swear?
Yeah,
Sorry.
it's fine.
Um, gave a hoot, about, um, other victims, or of human rights abuses, or of oppression. And yet, I had trouble exercising empathy for Palestinians, or I felt something for them, but I was quiet about it. I self-censored, or you know what I mean? And it's really interesting to realize that there is just so much of that that's maybe inherited. Maybe it's like a colonial, you know, inherit subconscious, conscious or subconscious, inherited racism, discrimination, white supremacy that some people don't even realize they have, perhaps, or those prejudices, because at the end of the day, that comes from indoctrination and dehumanization. So if you think about it, you know, so many people around the world are just, they've been on the receiving end of what has been pretty much a hijacked narrative. The Palestinian narrative has been hijacked for far, far, far too long. And we know what media and manipulation has been involved for decades. So that's the explanation. But anyway, I detract.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you, like, based on that, and you're working on a different narrative, like of humanizing the Palestinians. Well, of course, mainstream media is like working in the opposite direction. And let's say like if it's Hollywood movies or any like um, like just the big movie scene, it's also like, not, let's say, pro-Palestinian. So you told me about like some positive reactions that you got from people for them like to reflect on um their thoughts and their biases, but do you also receive any like negative commentary or negativity just from other people in the scene of making movies, like other directors, actors?
No, I mean, to be really honest, I mean, there's nothing worth giving any oxygen to whatsoever. Of course, I've got on my social media, certain messages, you call it hate mail or whatever it is, comments here and there. Nothing noteworthy worth pointing out. I get on with what I'm doing, and it seems to have, audiences and interest and a lot of love. I mean, you take a look at the present film won dozens and dozens of international awards. It won a BAFTA. It was nominated for an Oscar. I didn't do that alone. It was carried. It was carried by all the people who watched it and all the people who voted for it and all the, you know what I mean? So there's been so
Yeah.
much love and all the media that came with that as well. Of course, along the way, there have been, attempts to sort of attack, as it were, but nothing worth me giving any airtime in this conversation to be honest.
Mhm.
And in this past sort of year and a half of genocide, I think in the initial months after October 7th, you had a real viciousness
Mhm.
unleashed by a lot of sort of and it was unleashed by a lot of political Zionists with a lot of hate and vitriol and I'm a couple of things are coming to my mind, but again, nothing I want to give any oxygen to. It's what I have realized in this period is that many people want to understand what's been going on in Palestine for so long. I know that my films are received really well by audiences, even people who may not understand really the full reality, or they might have had their biases, like I said, and then they kind of go, wait, hold on, I can't believe this is what's going on. And what I've realized is that there's always going to be haters. There's also going to be people in the film industry who just don't love my films, and that's fine as well, So it's I agree with you in terms of, it's I think that there has been a lot of just misrepresentation. You want to call it deliberate or an element of, how they can make their money. I really don't know. Um, and I just think that the sort of gatekeepers to these kind of false narratives or these racist misrepresentations of Arabs, of Palestinians, of whether they be Christian or Muslim, of Muslims, is just, you know, it's appalling. But with social media, with transatlantic media, with alternative medias, with, independent cinema and beyond, I feel like it's just those, we can break through those narratives much, much better now. That said, the censorship that is now taking place, especially on the back of the genocide in Gaza, is very worrying. And so I do feel like that window to really, really get the Palestinian narrative out there is closing. And we really have to push to keep it open.
And I wanted to like ask you like about the screening now in the US. Um like with everything that's going on and, students who are speaking for Palestine, now we're seeing them, taken like to ICE detention centers and being detained for speaking out for Palestine. So how do you see your film screening now like in the US when you know, freedom of speech doesn't seem to be there for people who are pro-Palestinian.
Mm. Well, look, I mean, I think what's happening at the moment is absolutely appalling. It's beyond. And I think more than my opinion, I think it's the American people are hopefully starting to realize that their First Amendment rights are being violated, curtailed. And, you know, this is only the beginning. If you let all this pass, then boy, oh boy, you know, in many ways, it'll be the beginning of the end. These are the big signs of a, you know, dictatorships of a police state, as it were, and so forth. So very disturbing. Look, I mean, I'm super excited actually about the release of the film. It's going to be in cinemas across the US from, I believe, April 11th, starting in New York, and then from April 18th across the whole country. And how is it across the whole country? Well, hold on, programmers have programmed it. So it's not us, we're not renting spaces. You know, the film has been put in front of, you know, all the sort of film exhibitors, as it were, and they like the film. They feel that this is a film that is very pertinent to the time, that is well made, that it's a multi-award winning film. It's got brilliant actors, and they've programmed it even in some of the very mainstream cinemas across the US. So, from my perspective, you know, unless there's a plan now to ban cinema, you know what I mean? Then the film is there and it's going to be there, and even if it's, you know, whatever they want to shut down will always be available, and we have the internet and so forth. So I'm just excited to have good conversations with people and really, I hope, inspire and ignite them. I have absolute awe and respect for all those students and beyond who are on the ground in the US, really fighting the good fight. And I think history will show not only were they on the right side of history and of morally and ethically, but that we all, I mean, at the end of the day, everybody can see, literally anyone with half a brain and eyes that want to see can see what's happening on the ground, and this impunity that Israel seems to have, and that the US is, I mean, it sounds horrible, but it's like they're crack weapons dealer, and you know, diplomatic immunity pimp. It's shocking. It's bizarre, to be honest. And so I think, and I hope, average Americans who might not have had any interest in Palestine, or, you know, fine, but take an interest in your own democracy and your own, you know, the standing in the world. And I say democracy, I mean, frankly, wake up. This isn't a democracy. It's been a plutocracy, the best democracy money can buy, for a long time. But now, in the words of Chris Hedges, you know, it's quite clear that Trump is not, you know, the disease. He's the symptom of a rotten system where there's been a coup d'etat by corporates, by you know, the oligarchs, by capitalism. That's it. That's our America right now. So yeah, I mean, let's see what happens. But I think the film, in terms of reception and by audiences, I mean, to be honest, we screened in film festivals across the US, and you know, the ones that we did screen at, that did program us, the film was beautifully received. We won the Audience Award at San Francisco International Film Festival. We won the Audience Award at the Washington, D.C. Film Fest, International Film Festival there. Brooklyn, we also won an award. So yeah, I don't think about those things too much. Just my heart and prayers, really, and my solid solidarity, my active solidarity is with those who have been, you know, literally abducted on the streets of the US right now.
Your like audiences in the US, where they can like find the screenings?
Yes. So the teacher, if you go to the teacher.film, www.theteacher.film, you'll find all the information on the film, you'll find the trailer, and you'll find a button or two where you click and it will take you to all the locations and which states and which cinemas in those states is going to be screening the film. And then from there, you can click to whichever cinema or location you want to find out the showing times and purchase tickets. But we will be having in New York a couple of screenings with Q&As where yours truly, myself, will be there in person. And actually, although no one knows this quite yet, confirmation that our lead actor, Saleh Bakri, will also be with me in New York for those Q&As. And then in LA and in California, there'll be a number of Q&As as well where I'll be present. But the film should be screening, in cinemas across the country for a number of weeks. And you can find it all on that website. And then after that, more news to come of eventually where you'll be able to watch it online and video on demand, essentially, and so forth. So, yeah.
Yeah, so has your film been screened in Palestine, and how can also, like people here watch the movie, The Teacher?
Yeah, no, we had a sort of a limited cinema release already in Palestine back in September. Saleh Bakri and Mohammed Abdurrahman, who plays Adam, attended the premiere at the Jerusalem Film Festival, where the audience loved it, and then we released the film in just a couple of cinemas. Of course, with this genocide raging on, people aren't like it's not something to sort of, as it were, be celebrated in terms of people going to the cinema. So limited release there, but since then and as we speak now, the film is available in Palestine, all across the Middle East and North Africa, on, I believe, Google Play, Google TV, Apple TV, OSN TV. I believe also in 48 Palestine, it's available as well. So you can watch it online in Palestine at the moment, yes.